Um, oh, it's good to see all of you. I've been gone for the last couple of Sundays, so it's really nice to be back. And I missed some really good ones. It looked like, um, which is amazing. I think that's such a unique aspect of this particular place of C3. There's so many interesting, rich, diverse voices that we get to hear from each week. So amazing. Um, I was in Colorado. I was at a dream work training workshop. Sounded a bit redundant because I love working with dreams. And so I was in Colorado with Animas Valley Institute, which is where I do a lot of my programs with. I'm in their training program. So I was like submerged in this dreamlike landscape in southern Colorado with no electricity next to Sleeping Ute Mountain for 6 days. It was incredible. And then I emerged from that, and I had decided a number of months ago to do a half Ironman with my college roommate and my friend from Israel who lives in Madison. And at the time, it sounded like a really good idea. I was on the minimalist training plan. That's what I called it. So I was just training to finish, which I did finish, but it was really hard. Like, only today I realized, oh, I can walk down the stairs now. Uh, so anyway, and then my daughter graduated from high school, which I mentioned a couple weeks ago, and we had her graduation party yesterday. So it's just been I don't know, blindsided by life and also stuff of my own choosing. So it's good to be back here. It's good to be among all of you, listening to great music um, and great readings and meditations and all kinds of stuff. So, what do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about the sacred masculine. A few weeks ago, for Mother's Day, I want to talk about the sacred feminine. So, I want to balance out the yin and the yang and talk a bit about the sacred masculine, which is not very popular to talk about. Even to talk about the masculine, it's like, nah, let's not talk about that. It feels weird um, for obvious reasons, especially in a culture and in a government that is still very much male dominated. It's difficult to talk about, and it's difficult to talk about um, just in the with your own family, your own kids, with your own weirdness of a family reunion. What does it mean to be a man? What does masculine mean? And it's hard to talk about culturally broader. What are our images? In the pre-talk thing, I asked sort of what images come to mind when we say masculine, and I was looking for archetypal images, um, ancient images, rich images, but also just what images come to mind? Anything at all? What comes to mind when you think of the masculine? And the reason why I think it's such an important conversation is because it's the other side of the yin and the yang, for one thing. It's the nature, it's the way nature is. For some reason, the masculine and the feminine are interwoven into every aspect of nature. Did you know there are even male and female cottonwood trees? I didn't know that till this past week because a friend of mine who's in the same program that I'm in, who was at the Dream Training, he's an expert in watersheds and goes around the country, works with native people and communities restoring riverbeds that have been destroyed mostly by dams and farming. It's difficult work, but cottonwoods are one of the main trees in river basins in all of North America. And it's like, oh, that's a male cottonwood tree. I was like, how do you know? I won't tell you. Um, so it's just the way it is, and and I think we have to learn to talk about masculine and feminine, which is a slightly different but related conversation than just gender, male and female. Because masculine and feminine are also archetypal. What do I mean by an archetype? I mean a pattern, a constellation of images that are associated with the masculine. And we don't have very many models, as Robert Bly was saying in that fantastic reading from Iron John. The sons are left without models. What the hell are we supposed to do? Who's even worthy of imitation? What even counts anymore as a sacred image of the masculine? Almost you want to suppress the whole thing. And that's one cultural meme right now. Get rid of all things male and we'll be okay. I'm just going to reveal something politically. I wasn't the biggest fan of Hillary Clinton, just as a one of the two choices. Sadly, in America, that's all we get. I also wasn't a big fan of Donald Trump, but I almost wanted Hillary to win just because she's a woman. Because we're sort of at that place, like enough is enough. So put this whole masculine thing aside. Isn't that screwing up the world in the first place? And the answer to that is yes. But that's not the only. It's not that simple. Correct? So how do we talk about masculine? And what do we mean by some of these? And let me throw in a little just depth psychology right from the beginning. So Carl Jung gave us these concepts, images called the anima and the animus. I've mentioned them before. It's the inner masculine and the inner feminine. And one of the things that he says, along with all depth psychologists now, is that the psyche itself has both dimensions. So you have the yin and the yang externally in the world and internally. The psyche is both masculine and feminine, archetypally. And he called those the anima and the animus. And one of the things that he says is if you want to grow up and you're a male, you have to, at a certain point, begin to integrate your own femininity, called the anima. That's the big invitation. And the reverse, he also says, is true if you're a woman. You have to begin to integrate your own masculine instead of projecting it onto other people, which is how we all start. The reason why I'm bringing that up conceptually is, what are we talking about? We're not talking about something that's totally separate. Like in junior high when I don't know if I went to a public school, but it's like time to talk about sex, so we'll put the boys in one room and the girls in another room. Okay, that's a great place to start in junior high. That's not a great place to stay. So eventually there has to be an integration of these things. So that's why I wanted to talk about the sacred feminine and Mother's Day and the sacred masculine a bit on Father's Day. And just to say at the beginning, we're talking about, yes, we need healthier images of masculinity, and we also need, at least ultimately, an integration of both. We have both components in the psyche. So that's kind of just like a caveat, I would suppose. So I started thinking about the big archetypal images. And don't be afraid of archetype. It's just a fancy way of saying a pattern. And here are the big archetypes, especially when it comes to masculinity. You have the image of a king. It's an archetype. You have warrior. You have magician, or trickster sometimes, but magician or healer. Those are kind of similar things. You have father. You have brother as archetypes. And these are images that are part of an image or images that make up what we would call masculine. These are archetypal. And archetypes have depth. As soon as I say something like warrior, that should make you both nervous and intrigued at the same time. Same with a word like king. Like if I said, we need a new king, you'd be like, no. And also part of you deep would say, yes. They make us nervous because they're rich. They're rich, they have depth. That's why we need so many myths, stories, legends, poems, and songs to sing about these big archetypal images. Or if you want to think in terms of Plato, sort of ideals, these are kind of ideals. And the interesting thing about archetypes is they're not cleaned up. As soon as you say king, or let's take father, as soon as you say father, like, let's celebrate Father's Day, there's like a pause. It's not exactly like, yes. It's sort of like, maybe. Because it's complicated. That's why in Star Wars, which is mentioned in the Robert Bly quote we used earlier, you have Darth Vader, which is Dark Father. You can't talk about fatherhood without the Dark Father. And that means, by the way, there's not, Bob is a good father and Sam is the dark father. It's that both exist inside you. You don't think so? Yeah, right. All of a sudden you find yourself, you're like the kind, fun-loving dad, and then one day you snap over, somebody dropped the milk in the kitchen. and you're raging about this. What's going on? Well, there's the presence of the dark. There's the presence of Darth Vader in your own home. So anyway, talking about masculinity is complicated. It's complex, which is why we need myths, stories, and legends. So I want to do two things today. I want to talk about Robert Bly a bit. I'm going to talk about some American images of masculinity using his book Iron John. Iron John changed my life. I can say there are a few books that really, I didn't know it at the time, changed the course of my life, and that's one of them. I read Iron John on a plane from Michigan to Alaska, very manly thing to do. I read that book, and I remember I kept closing it, and the thought was, what the hell is this? Then I'd open back up, and I'd read a little bit more, and then I'd close it. The feeling was something like, I don't know what it means to be a man. I'm scared. That was the feeling reading Iron John. And also, I'm so attracted to whatever it is that he's trying to say. I've never read anything like this in my life. So that's my book review of Iron John. It's written in the 1980s. And I like Robert Bly's poems anyway, but it's an incredible book, and he's trying to start the deeper conversation of what is the sacred masculine. What I mean by sacred, I mean set apart, infused with meaning, I guess would be the best way to say it. So anyway, what was my point? Oh, I want to talk about Iron John with some images of masculinity, particularly American ones. And then I want to talk about a little bit of Richard Rohr, because when I think about masculinity, these two voices have influenced some of my own ideas and challenged me deeply. Robert Bly and Richard Rohr. And Richard Rohr has a book called Adam's Return, and I want to talk about what he calls the 5 promises of male initiation. Talk about that. Anyway, that's a little roadmap. So let's start with Robert Bly here. So he says what's interesting about America is that we have several stereotypes that emerged on the American landscape that have influenced our ideas about what it means to be a man. The first one he has great language, he calls the old man-minded farmer. Okay, he says this is largely from the 1600s. And the old man-minded farmer is an introvert and proud of it. Okay, and the old man-minded farmer will sit in church for 3 services with no heat and not complain. Okay, that's largely New England. He actually tries to associate some of these geographically. The old man-minded farmer. That's what it means to be a man. You sit in church, you don't complain, there's no heat, and you're an introvert, and nobody gets in there, and you're proud of it. Okay? And that's not universal. That's just something that emerged on, particularly, he says, the American landscape. And America is an experiment because when you have multiple cultures being uprooted largely from Europe and planting themselves on the soil of a country they know nothing about, you don't know what's going to happen. You know? And so you have these things that begin to emerge as sort of cultural memes, we might call them. That's one of them. Here's another one. He says that largely developed in the South. For some reason, this makes me laugh. But he calls the South the mother-bound cavalier. Okay? I'm going to do what I want, but I have an enormous mother complex. All right? And I'm really attached to mom, and I'll defend mom, but nobody can tell me what to do, and I've got a cavalier spirit. He said that tended to rest in the South, which is funny. So the mother-bound cavalier. He says the next cultural image of being a man, he calls the greedy railroad entrepreneur. Okay? And if you start, why am I mentioning these? Because if you start asking the question, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to develop masculine energy? These are the things that have culturally been offered. The greedy railroad entrepreneur. What does that say? I'm literally going to go in a straight line and plow through anything that gets in my way. Rivers, mountains, hills, prairies, plowing straight forward, very phallic, you know. I mean, I don't mean to be so graphic, but plow ahead, and I'll just destroy everything in my path. That's the greedy railroad entrepreneur. And even the word entrepreneur which today I know is kind of praised in certain circles. Oh, you're an entrepreneur. The backdrop of that is I'm going to get what I want. I got a vision for reality, and I'm going to go for it, and I'm by any means necessary. That's the backdrop of it. Someone like Trump is more like the greedy railroad entrepreneur. I mean, as if you think about him as like a kind of cartoon character, he sort of fits that. And you can see his hair blowing in the, the railway. You know, I have a very demented mind. I try to contain it on Sundays, but it leaks out. Okay. Um, and then he says another one developed largely in the West, which he calls the reckless, I can do without culture kind of man. That's moved west. I don't need culture. I can do without it. I'm a free spirit. Don't tell me what to do. It's not like the Cavalier, because that's very mother bound. It's I don't need anybody. I don't need mother, father, heritage, nothing. Just out to the West I go. And even the West feels like that. I mean, who's from California? Nobody is from California, you know? I'm a native Californian. Yeah, right. That's a meaningless, doesn't even make any sense. Anyway, I don't know why you're laughing. Probably laughing because it's true. Okay, let me give you a few more that he brings up. One starts to emerge over time, which is very recognizable now. He calls the 50s male. Okay? This really emerged about the same time that we had things like television, where there could be a real constellation around certain images. I mean, before that, America was very geographically bound. You're from a region, from an area. Well, as soon as you have pop culture and mass media, the images can be consolidated. And that you have beginning in the 1950s with the 50s male. And here are some, and you'll recognize these things. They labor responsibly. That's the 50s male. They support the wife and the kids. All right. They don't know anything about the female soul, but they appreciate the female body. That's the 50s male. This is from Robert Bly. Don't blame me. All right. They never cry. They like football. They're supposed to. And they get to work early and they leave late. And they don't bring work home. Okay, you don't know what the 50s male does. All right. Now honestly, when you hear phrases like, first, by the way, I will shock you if you didn't hear me say this before, but when Bill Clinton announced that he was going to run for president of the United States, and he stood there on the governor's mansion, he said, I want to run for president of the United States, and I'm going to make America great again. Direct quote from Bill Clinton. Yeah. Anyway. But when you hear a phrase like make America great again, some people imagine what they mean is let's get back to the American 50s male. Really? Because it's a fill in the blank kind of phrase, right? Let's make America great again, like the 1630s. What? That doesn't even make any sense. I don't even know what you're talking about. Okay. Now, one of the things that happened, and this is why Robert Bly wrote Iron John, he said something broke in culture when it comes to masculinity in the 1960s. And there were a lot of imports to that, but one of the biggest ones was the Vietnam War. Because the World War I and World War II, as brutal and as graphic and as terrible as they were, people who came home from war at least thought I was trying to do the moral thing. Not so with Vietnam. They got there and they said, the man lied to us. So something broke in culture, which probably needed to break. And Robert Bly said what began to emerge out of that was the culture of what he calls the soft male, the sensitive one who wears flowers, grows the hair out, is passive, just is kind. Sort of like our images of Jesus. Jesus is like a passive guy, Who's afraid of Jesus? He pets lambs, He's just a nice guy. Children sit on his lap, If he lived in the 60s, he probably did drugs, like, hey guys, that kind of image of Jesus. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that that's actually true, by the way. I mean, do know a bit about the historical Jesus. I think that's those are false images. But you know what I'm saying? Nice guy. Just be a nice guy. Robert Bly calls that the soft male. He says the problem with that is not that men were getting in touch with the sacred feminine, which they were. Absolutely needed and necessary part of growing up. It's just all things masculine, power, even aggression, the sense of warrior, spiritedness, self-sacrifice went into the basement, suppressed. So therefore, it was going to leak out eventually. That's what he said. So he wrote Iron John to help men sort of integrate some of these things. So since the 1980s, if you start asking, I mean, the 1980s is when I was a kid, and it's a what would we say? What are our cultural images of a male since the 1980s? I mean, aren't they like Legion? Is there one? Who do we pick from? And all of our heroes keep blowing up before our eyes. I mean, when I was a kid, every Thursday night, we sat down as a family and watched The Cosby Show. Okay? And now we've seen behind the curtain, you know? What the hell was all that? What was that? The children have eaten, or the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. So, my generation, maybe you feel like this too, and younger generations, who can we trust? If we can't trust Bill Cosby, we can't trust anybody. Seriously. Just a nice, funny guy who works hard, you know? That, by the way, I thought that was funny. Probably the first time Jeremiah has ever been read and people laughed. Fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Man, that's where we live right now. I was thinking about that show Modern Family, which I like a lot. But let's just take the one dad, Phil, in there, okay? And let's just say this is an image of masculinity in America. What is this? Kind of a fun guy who's like pals with his kids, you know, just like, let's go out and cause some trouble, kids, you know. But he's sort of robbed of any vitality or risk. He's just a funny guy who sells real estate, you know. That we can tolerate culturally because that's containing the masculine in a way, confining it, at least in my particular. That's an interesting show. I could say more about it. We were talking a bit about it in the pre-talk thing. Okay, so you're with me. Are there multiple images of? Is there reason to be confused about what does it mean to be a man? What do we and how do we even live into these deeper images or calls, what I might say, of the soul? So, Richard Rohr wrote a book called Adam's Return, and one of the things that he claims in there is that all cultures, and he's sort of getting a bit from Joseph Campbell, all cultures recognize something, that boys do not grow up into men very easily. They are full of hormones, and they have little mini power trips, and they think they're the center of the world, and if they're not broken from this, then they will wreak all kinds of havoc on the world. Sort of universally, cultures recognize this. And they developed complex rites of passage and initiatory experiences so to help their young people, their young men, grow up and be contributing members of society. So the ultimate goal is not the self-made man who lives in isolation. I did it my way. At least for a healthy culture point of view, healthy masculinity looks like coming to the community, back to the community, and contributing the most amount of good for the most amount of people. Now we could say that maybe it's universal of male and female, period, but that's a contributing member. Are you with me on that? So in his book, he says there are 5 what he calls promises, we call them rules or images or realities that are involved from moving from adolescent, arrogant, egocentric, narcissistic young man, which is where we all start, into a contributing, self-sacrificial, honoring, generative adult. Okay? 5 things you got to learn. I'm going to read them to you, and these could all be teachings in and of themselves, but I want you to hear all 5 to sort of see the ancient map and how far we are from it. Okay? Here's number 1. The first thing you got to learn: life is hard. Okay? It's also the first tenet of Buddhism: life is suffering. When you are told life shouldn't be this way, you're in serious trouble. Okay? Life is this way. It is hard. That's what's to be expected. And when does it stop? When you die, which will also be hard. Okay? Life is hard. Now, would you say that's a common message that young men are getting? It might be hard to get enough money to buy what you want, but that's about the level of difficulty that we expect. It will be hard to achieve all your material goals. That's paper thin right there. But life is hard. That's the first lesson if you want to grow up. That's number 1. Oh, by the way, I should say something about this. Leslie brought it up because, interestingly enough, Richard Rohr was on Krista Tippett this morning talking about some of these things, which is awesome. Anyway, he says one of the things with male initiation is that young men had to be broken of their own false sense of power. They had to be led into powerlessness to discover how to use whatever power they might have for health and good. Otherwise, it just ruins the world. Okay? So in order to do that, you have to learn life is hard. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, one of my favorites: you are not important. Yeah, you are not important. Now think about our education system, which is built on you are special. You are important. Everything you do is right. Even if you spell this word wrong, it's just okay. That's just who you are right now. Okay? I'm exaggerating a little bit, although I'm not at all. Okay? You are not important. Now that is leveling. To really learn that early in life, the irony is that sets you up well. You are not important. And now we've turned importance into meaning in our culture, largely through the culture of fame. I think it's very interesting that after the 1960s and 70s, that Ronald Reagan became president, because essentially you have someone who's famous becoming president. Not that we would do that again, okay? But all we have is importance equals fame, therefore equals they must know what they're talking about. Okay? How about learning you are not important to begin with? All right, so now we're talking about something. Number 3, related, but slightly different: your life is not about you. Okay? Your life is not about you. You know, what's that Sinatra song? I Did It My Way. That's someone who didn't learn the lesson. Seriously. They just simply didn't learn it. They're still stuck in adolescence. I did it my way. And that's what the president danced to at his inauguration. No offense, it's just the boy. And I can pick on him, and you're all like, yeah, you should pick on him. But he represents most of America. Seriously. Life is about me and what I get and what I can amass and my rights and my ideas and my property. Me. That's only the 3rd lesson that you're supposed to learn as a boy. Your life is not about you. Okay, now we're talking about something. Number 4, difficult, also equally related: you are not in control. You are not in control. This is a difficult one to learn, because I'm not saying you don't have free will, you don't have power, you can't act in the world, but you're not in control, not in any ultimate sense. You can't even control whether or not your heart is beating. So you are not in control. In some ways, it's a kind of brokenness and submission to something larger. It doesn't answer the question, who is in control? Because you could just supply it like, well, God is in control. That's almost too easy. I mean, to know deeply, I'm actually not in control. I don't have as much control as I thought. And you want to know an example of that? That's called parenthood. Okay? And here's number 5, my personal favorite. You're going to die. You are going to die. Yeah, you're going to die. Rohr gives some cultural examples from antiquity or from various cultures around the world. One of them would make their own young boys dig their own graves. Okay? That'll wake you up in the morning. Okay? Hey, morning kids, time to dig your grave. Now, that sounds like kind of morbid. How else are you going to learn that? Because as soon as you know you're going to die, a possibility begins to open up in front of you, which is, I either want to live a meaningful life or not. This is limited. This is all I get. So, yeah, more of that. Okay, again, is our culture teaching these 5 lessons? I'll read them to you. Life is hard. You are not important. Your life is not about you. You are not in control. And finally, you're going to die. What I love about this, first of all, I think it's true. So I respect this, and there's something about this rings deeply true. And the other thing about it is that this is for young people. I mean, this is how much trouble we are in a culture. I feel like I need to learn these 5 lessons. And I'm 40 something, okay? 2, I think. I lost track in the 30s, and then I started remembering around 40, and now I'm losing track again. So I guess that's the way it is. I see some of you nodding. Yeah. All right, I'll end with one image here. And that is the image of Telemachus. So the Odyssey does not begin with Odysseus. The Odyssey begins with Odysseus' son. If you want to know what the Odyssey is about, it's about Telemachus. It's about the next generation. So Telemachus is at home, and his dad is gone. He's off to war, or he's died. He doesn't know which. And he's bitter about it. He has father wounds. Okay? My dad left me and went off and did noble things, I think, or he's dead. I don't know. Meanwhile, back at home, my mom is dating other people. Now he has mother issues. Okay? And the suitors back at home are taking advantage of the kingdom, draining the kingdom of its resources. And you can see the clock ticking, the sun can, saying, there will be no kingdom in a few years. Yes, you should be thinking, you should be translating this to modern times. Okay? I'm left with a kingdom that's being robbed of its resources, and there seems to be lust and greed at the top of the food chain here, meaning in the kingdom, and I'm bitter about this. I'm Telemachus, and I don't know what to do about it. So Telemachus goes down to the beach, and he's moping, which is why I wanted to begin with these Cherokee words of wisdom. Why do you spend time brooding, my boy? Part of that is just walk along the beach. Woe is me. My dad's nowhere to be found. The kingdom's a mess. If they had video games during this time period, I might as well go home and play Fortnite. Oh, if in modern times, Telemachus would be walking with his Apple earphones in, just like listening to some, sad alternative music. Here he is, just moping around. Okay, that's Telemachus on the beach, and Athena and Mentor is a character, come and they talk to him, and they basically say to him this. They say, "Get off your ass and go find out if your father is dead or not, and then come home and act like a king." If he doesn't leave the beach, there's no story. And that's the place we are culturally. We have young people and people that are 40 something, okay? Just have a culture where people are moaning on the beach, really. And there's a lot to be bitter about. But there's something about these old archetypes where Athena and Mentor are saying, you gotta grow up. It's time to learn these 5 lessons. That life is hard. You think it's going to be easy for him to leave home and go wander around, who knows, looking for his own father? And maybe when he finally finds him, he'll be standing on his grave. Okay? Whatever, he doesn't know what's going to happen. But without him leaving home base, there's no story. And that's sort of the beginning, I think, of the sacred masculine journey. We all have seen our fathers eat their fair share of sour grapes, and our teeth, collectively, they're set on edge. And the question is, are we going to get off the beach and start the journey of taking deeper responsibility for integrating our own masculinity? The old noble call, I suppose. These are what the old stories are teaching me. So on Father's Day, that's what I'm thinking about. Thinking about my own, standing on the beach and my own kids and just where we are. I don't want to be just one who whines and drinks margaritas on the beach and complains about the man. Okay, even though the man is really annoying. Okay, but the call of the ancient story, I think, the beginning of the masculine journey is it's time to get off the beach and learn some of these hard lessons. So that's what I got for you today. Thanks for listening.